Welcome, folks. My name is Sam Barrasso, and I'm the Program Manager for the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. Here today, we're going to walk you all through the Community Responsive Grant Program for in our Request for Proposals number 3. This is our most recent and current request for proposals. Now, you're here with us today, but this application period is open from November 29th, 2023 through February 1st of 2024. All right. So in the slides, we're going to walk you through some background context, all the information you need to know in order to put together a successful application. But first, I want to start with just giving you a little context around the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. You may know it as the Portland Clean Energy Fund, or more fondly known as PCEF. Now, the Portland Clean Energy Fund is a fund that invests in climate action that advances racial and social justice. The program was passed by Portland voters in November 2018, and importantly, it was the first climate fund and remains the first climate fund created and led by organizations that represent communities of color within the Portland area in a broad coalition with progressive businesses, environmental groups, social service organizations, and many others that contribute to the success of this ballot measure. The program generates over $100 million annually for clean energy investments within the city of Portland. And importantly, it is funded by a 1% gross receipts surcharge on businesses that make over $1 billion nationally and $500,000 locally on the basis of their Portland sales. And so we share that namely to have folks, as they enter and engage with us, to know that we're here year in, year out, and we want folks to think about what they need today and not think through a scarcity model, but recognize that this is a resource for you and it will be here over the next many, 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 many years. All right, but just a little background and context around why PCEF came into being. It was in response, as folks know, within the Pacific Northwest, within Oregon, we are a region that have been known for being incredibly progressive and forward-thinking around our environmental policies, our environmental solutions, and investing in environmental solutions. However, despite that forward-thinking, those benefits have largely accrued to well-off households and businesses. And so what we do know are people of color, low-income folks, folks with disabilities are most burdened by climate change and least connected to the opportunities to remedy it. They both face greater exposure, less access to adaptation, most cost-burdened, and even in sectors where they're mature, where we've been at it for many years, our jobs are still predominantly going to men and folks that are white. And same goes for the non-residential construction sector. And this is all built on many, many years of energy incentive programs and credits that are have been developed economically exclusionary, but are rapidly working to remedy that. And PCEF was designed to remedy that directly. Now, as you think about the program, it's core and it's important to remember our guiding principles. Now, I'm not going to walk through them in detail here, but it's important you take a look at our website and walk through them, as they are elements that are connected to the application. The program is focused on climate action with multiple benefits. That is core to the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. The program is justice-driven, community-powered, and ultimately is critical we are accountable. And we're going to talk a lot about PCEF priority populations within the application. You'll see that language referenced many times, and it's important to know who we mean by that. So PCEF focuses investment on climate action by giving priority to folks that have been historically under-resourced by sustainability, climate action, and clean energy programs. We collectively call these groups our priority populations, and they include, but are not limited to, people with low incomes, people of color, people living with disabilities. And so, again, our priority populations are referenced through our application questions and are considered in our scoring criteria. So it's important that you specify and you have a solid and strong understanding of the priority populations that you intend to serve with your projects. All right, but what brings us here? Now, the overarching framework for how the Portland Clean Energy Fund makes its investments was adopted by the Portland City Council in its climate investment plan in September of 2023. The plan itself allocates $750 million that we anticipate spending over the next 5 years in climate investments. The plan itself includes funding allocations for 16 strategic programs, a tree maintenance reserve, as well as the Community Responsive Grants Program, which we are discussing here today. Now, specifically, the Community Responsive Grants Program is designed to be exclusively investing in projects by community-based nonprofit organizations. On the next sections, we're going to bring you into a few more level of detail. We're going to give you some of the basics around how much funding is available in all of the community responsive grants that we expect to deliver over the next 5 years, as well as this particular community responsive grant application. We'll give you context on who can apply, as well as important dates that are going to be that'll be critical that you hold on to so that you do not miss critical deadlines. All right. So when we look at our community responsive grants and the allocations over the next 5 years, we've got about 6 funding categories where we will be allocating funding across. The first is our energy efficiency and renewable energy funding category. We have 92 million over 5 years allocated to that area. Now, in this specific community responsive grant, we anticipate awarding 20 to 30 million for projects that meet that mold. The next funding category is transportation decarbonization. There, over the next 5 years, we anticipate awarding about 35.5 million. And in this particular round of grants, we expect to award 10 to 20 million. Within workforce and contractor development funding area, we expect to award 30 million over 5 years. In this round, 5 to 7 million. Within regenerative ag, we expect to award 14 million over the next 5 years. Within this round, 5 to 9 million. Green infrastructure, about 5 million over 5 years, and 1 to 3 million in this current round. And then in the other category, which is intended to capture greenhouse gas emissions reducing projects that do not neatly fall into these other categories, but otherwise provide clear community benefits, we expect to award 2 million across those sorts of projects over the next 5 years, and 400,000 in this particular community responsive grant application period. Now, it's important to note that we will host every single year on an annual basis a community responsive grant application period. So if this isn't your year, you will have other opportunities, and those some speak to that collective of the 5 years. Now, who can apply? As we noted, nonprofit organizations are the core intended beneficiaries and implementers for our community responsive grants. Those that meet the following requirements can apply for community responsive grants. You have to be designated by the federal government as a 501c or 521a nonprofit entity. You've got to be registered and certified with the Oregon Secretary of State as a nonprofit organization, and you cannot be on the Oregon Department of Justice's disqualified charities list. Now, we do expect that there are going to be small organizations or organizations that want to benefit from the administrative capacities of a larger organization. And so both newly established and emerging groups who do not meet those criteria or just want that additional support may apply for a PSEF grant with a fiscal sponsor. And we've got some more content and information about that on our website. Now to the dates. November 29th, we're out in the wild and the RFP is released. Now, it's going to be an important context for folks that have applied to us before. This year, we are using the Web Grants application platform, which we will describe shortly, to capture folks' applications. It is critical that if you intend to apply for a grant, that the last day, the deadline for you to create an account within Web Grants is going to be January 25, 2023. And then the deadline for applications is 5 p.m. on February 1st of 2024. And the deadline, I should go back, for to register for Web Grants is January 25, 2024. So please make sure you note that. And then we will enter, after the application is closed, we will begin our evaluation period, which we will detail shortly. And then we expect to make, in this current round, we expect to recommend our grants for City Council consideration in between June and August of 2024. So that's the time period in which we expect City Council to both consider and ultimately make their decisions on the package of grants. Right. In the next sections, we're going to just give a little more context and breakdown. Now, we spoke to the funding areas, the types of the categories where you could apply for grants. Now, these are the different types of grants that you can apply for. And we have both planning and implementation grants. So first, PSEF spans many different areas, whether we're talking about regenerative ag, whether we're talking about green infrastructure, energy efficiency. And in each of those areas, we want to enable folks to be able to plan and to work through and implement projects. And so this just captures the diversity, this image here, the diversity of the types of projects that we fund. And we want folks to see that and think through that as they move through our process. Our planning grants are intended to support organizations in conducting assessments or planning needed to develop a full project proposal. Now, eligible activities for planning grants include research and learning, feasibility and technical evaluation and consultation, community outreach, and education in service of developing project ideas. Across our planning grants, we expect to fund anywhere from $400,000 to $700,000 of the total allocation of funds in planning grants. And there are two different sort of sub-allocations. You can request up to $100,000 for a planning grant for a project where you are planning and developing a project that has a known physical improvement that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and advance racial and social justice within one of our funding categories. Or you could request up to $50,000, so a lower amount, for planning, community engagement, and education, to where you're maybe one further step behind, to identify some of those opportunities for specific communities to benefit from or participate in climate action. Now, implementation grants can be used for projects that address climate change and advance racial and social justice within one of the PSEF funding areas. Projects can include physical improvements. So examples are weatherization, solar installation, tree planting, regenerative agriculture, and/or non-physical activities. And that happens in the context most typically in workforce or contractor development. We're not building something, we are resourcing, skilling up, training contractors or individuals. Now, we expect and anticipate that as folks have their implementation projects, that a certain phase of it or the beginning of it may have some planning, and that can be part of an implementation grant, but the implementation must be the primary focus of the application. And so as you develop an application for an implementation grant, you generally have to have all the details, the scope, the budget, all the pieces you need, but we recognize that at the beginning of any project, there will be initial planning to tease out how you're going to roll it all out. And then the allocation. And so this will vary by project type with an expected total funding for implementation grants of 40 to 60 million. And we will award a mix of both small and large grants. So you will see that there, and we do expect, and we will be awarding a mix of those grants. So I encourage you to apply for a grant that fits the right size for where you are for the project that you're scoping out. Next, we're going to jump into and we're going to dive a little more deeply into the funding categories themselves, a little description of them, and then the funding availability. And this is going to be a little different than prior years for folks that have applied to our RFPs 1 or 2. Starting with our largest funding area, energy efficiency and renewable energy. These projects include renewable energy, storage, energy efficiency projects in or on residential buildings, nonprofit occupied commercial buildings, which may be privately owned. They may include community solar that benefits low-income Portland residents. And then all our energy efficiency and renewable energy projects must reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Total expected funding in this category is 20 to 30 million. The large grant cap is largest in this category. It's 10 million for a given project, or the small grant cap is 2 million. It gives you a sense. Those are the maximum that any individual grant could apply for. And here, there are just images here of folks installing solar panels or folks installing a ductless heat pump. Within our workforce and contractor development program, there are 3 general categories of work. There's youth education and exposure, which includes youth education and engagement that increases the knowledge of and interest in careers in the climate work, so that youth understand those opportunities that are out there earlier in their career paths. We have workforce training, and that includes pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, and other job training that helps folks and helps us collectively diversify the green workforce with a focus on programs that support direct job placement and workers in the construction trades involved in building energy efficiency and renewable energy. And then we have contractor development. This includes technical assistance and other support, such as business grants, to help build, develop, and grow diverse contractors and businesses that provide climate-focused goods and services. The total expected funding for this funding area in this round is 5 to 7 million. And for workforce and contractor development projects, the large grant cap is 2 million. The small grant cap is 500,000. For youth education and exposure, the grant cap is just a singular grant cap, and it is 400,000. All right, transportation decarbonization, our newest and most exciting funding area. I kid, they're all exciting, but our newest one certainly. So these include projects that support transportation electrification, projects that support mode shifting to active transportation, whether that's walking, biking, or using transit. And all transportation decarbonization projects must reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our total expected funding this round is 10 to 20 million, and the large grant cap is 4 million. The small grant cap is 500,000. Regenerative agriculture. These projects include those that improve access to local food, fibers, and materials using practices that sequester carbon in the soil and support a healthier environment. Now, here we are enabling folks can apply for grants that support their general operating costs, and that is specifically and only available to organizations whose primary focus is local food production using regenerative agricultural practices. Now, for that, it is capped at 25% of an organization's operating costs or $100,000 annually, whichever is less. These are available as 3-year grants, and the organization, in order to be eligible, must pay all staff wages at or above the PSEF minimum wage, which is 180% of minimum wage. The total expected funding is 5 to 7 million for both for our non-general operating cost proposals, and the large grant cap is 1 million. The small grant cap is 200,000. Green infrastructure. Now, these are projects that include planting and establishment and maintenance of trees or shrubs. This includes restoration, depaving, green roofs, and in addition, all of these projects must reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The total expected funding is 1 to 3 million within this round, and the large grant cap is 1 million. The small grant cap is 200,000. Last but not least, we have our other category, which we described earlier. These are projects that do not fall into the prior categories mentioned, but they support the program goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and advancing racial and social justice. The total expected funding is 400,000 total for this round. And before I move to the next slide, I think that's an important note to mention is that any one of the grants, with the exception of the regenerative agriculture operating cost grant, can be in the planning grants. So any implementation grant can go out to 5 years. That is the maximum duration is 5 years. And last, this is an important caveat, and this is an important design of PSEF, is that you can integrate those funding areas. We described all the funding available across the individual funding areas, but we encourage and folks that want to, that it makes sense to, can integrate their projects. So you can do a housing energy efficiency retrofit and install an EV charger station, or you can do that sort of project and install trees in the private areas of the property. So we certainly, you are enabled and you are allowed to. You do not need to necessarily fill out different applications, although if you decide to do so, that is a strategic decision, but you can integrate funding areas as part of a singular application. Now, here's some specific resources and requirements that we'll have available. Each funding area has a page on our RFP guide page on the website, which provides additional resources, requirements, and guidance for applicants. We encourage you all to review those pages. We will host an online and technical assistance webinars and follow-up technical assistance question and answer sessions that are going to be offered on a range of topics related to our funding areas. We will be hosting throughout the application period office hours that are going to be held weekly during the open application period, at which you can ask staff questions about the RFP, about your proposals, and about the process itself. And then we encourage folks to sign up now for technical assistance and those office hours at our technical assistance page on the RFP3 guide website. And if you go through all those resources and still can't find the answer that you'd like, we always encourage folks to email the Clean Energy Fund at portlandoregon.gov with your question. But the next set of slides, we're going to go a little deeper here around the uses of funds, and we'll start with the allowable expenses, just so that folks know generally these are the generally allowable expenses. We'll talk about some of the allowable expenses where there's limits or restrictions for the program. We'll talk about the not allowable uses of funds, and then just some of the rules you need to know and be aware of before you apply. All right, so allowable expenses. Now, should go without saying, but materials, supplies, and equipment purchases must be in service of implementing the proposed project. So those are allowable. They have to serve the project, and applicants should consider the social, economic, and environmental impacts of your purchasing choices. So we encourage folks to think about the greener products or the chemicals or whatever else that are going to be important that are going to be critical for your project, but choosing environmentally appropriate selections. Now, staff time, including wages and benefits, are allowable expenses for staff that are directly working on the project. Expenses associated with maintaining an investment over its lifetime are allowable. And these examples may be a prepayment of a service warranty, an HVAC maintenance contract, or a prepayment for 5 years of tree establishment care. So that is eligible. Or contractor support grants, items necessary for businesses starting or scaling up. And so these expenses are eligible within a contractor support grant. They may include a blower door test. They may include various equipment necessary to get into the pruning business. And then insurance costs. Insurance costs that are additional and a direct result of the requirements associated with the PSEF program and our grants are an allowable expense. Now, items necessary to support the recruitment, retention, and success of participants in workforce development grants are also allowable. And then project reporting expenses are allowable expenses. And so we certainly, and through this, we encourage applicants to integrate culturally appropriate and meaningful ways of communicating and reporting about their project, and those are allowable expenses. Now we're moving on to the allowable expenses with some limitations or restrictions. For applicants that are applying through a fiscal sponsor, they may do so, and they may allocate up to 10% of the project expenses for the fiscal sponsor fees. Overhead costs are allowable, and we allow up to 10% for travel, materials, and contracts, and 20% for personnel expenses. Note that applicants with a fiscal sponsor may have a combined overhead rate of up to 25%. General operating costs. These are limited, as we described earlier, only for organizations whose primary purpose is regenerative agriculture and local food production. Building improvements. For projects, PSEF will fund up to 70% of the projects must have at least 70% of the construction budget directly related to the energy improvement, whereas the remaining 30% can be used to address life, health, or safety issues. Now, for projects where they're adding additional funds from external sources, leverage, or match funds, if the total construction budget allocates at least a total construction budget inclusive of those match funds, if it allocates at least 70% directly to energy improvements, then up to 50% of the PSEF funds could be used to address life, health, and safety issues. If folks have questions about this, we certainly encourage you to come to an office hour or email the Clean Energy Fund at portlandoregon.gov. For new construction or building improvements, projects that will achieve net zero can apply for up to 25% of the total project cost. The project funding is not restricted in those instances to the energy measures so long as the building achieves net zero at completion. And then for commercial properties, privately owned commercial properties by individuals or for-profit organizations may be eligible to receive improvements if the nonprofit applicant holds a long-term lease or the building if the improvement is part of the training program. Continued. For projects in the right-of-way. So we know many folks are going to want to go after and attempt or put in proposals to work on projects in the right-of-way. For many of those, we expect that they're going to need to be permitted, installed, or delivered by a public entity. And so prior to proposing a project impacting the right-of-way, it is important you understand the necessary permitting and regulations. So we encourage you to review our program area specific or funding area specific pages, as some of them do include more information on right-of-way projects. And here, if you have questions, we highly encourage you to contact the program and email the program. Strategic Program 6 within the Climate Investment Plan is focused on comprehensive e-bike access and support. And Strategic Program number 7 is focused on clean transportation access. Those programs cannot be duplicated within the community responsive grant community responsive grant proposal. However, we encourage applicants, if they've got ideas there that are complementary to, builds on, or develops a valuable lessons learned that may connect with or interact with or have elements of those programs, that is encouraged. However, those programs, it is important you review those programs and do not attempt to duplicate those. Electric vehicles are eligible as grant expenditures. However, EV incentives designed to support a for-profit business requires at least a 75% cost share. The only exception to that 75% cost share is for specialized EVs that are used to help businesses engage in climate-related work. Now, land or building acquisition is allowed in very limited circumstances where it is a key component in the greenhouse gas reducing project. We encourage folks to reach out to the program if they've got questions there or come out to an office hour. Land acquisition is not allowed for regenerative agriculture, given one of the strategic programs are strictly focused on that. And then community supported agriculture. CSAs or other food shares sourced from within the city of Portland that employ regenerative agricultural practices may be eligible expenses within your grant application. Now, the not allowable use of funds. Now, a lot of these have been designed and they're not allowable in part because we were designing programs, other strategic programs as part of the climate investment plan that may serve those areas. And so we're happy to answer questions on why they may not be, but this is the list. So programs in energy efficiency or renewable energy area, what's not allowable is that any proposal that focuses on single family residential improvements to more than 50 housing units per year. Energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements in new or major redevelopment of regulated multifamily housing with 20 or more units. And so it's critical that new or major redevelopment. Commercial buildings occupied by for-profit businesses. Energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements at public schools. Improvements to government-owned facilities used for severe weather response. Improvements to market rate rental housing, unless an occupant is a low-income household. And standalone climate resiliency measures or improvements that do not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if you've got a project that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and has climate resiliency, great. If it solely has climate resiliency and does not reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is not eligible. For green infrastructure, not allowable is street tree planting in the public right-of-way, because we have a strategic program focused on that. For regenerative agriculture, it is going to be land acquisition and hydroponics and aquaponics. For transportation decarbonization, not allowable is electric vehicles for individual private ownership. For workforce and contractor development, not allowable is post-secondary education scholarships, what is allowable is post-secondary education scholarships limited to certification programs with direct connection to climate work. An example is the limited renewable energy license, technician license, or an arborist license. However, what is not allowable is scholarships for general education and four-year degrees. And what is not allowable is workforce training programs that do not have a fully developed curriculum. Now, in those instances, and if folks have those instances, they can apply for a planning grant to develop that curriculum, but for an implementation grant, you need to have a fully developed curriculum to apply. And then here's just some rules you need to know before you apply. Some types of property, real property and personal property valued above a certain threshold, obtained with PSEF funds, either in full or in part, may require the grantee to notify the city and receive approval for transfer of ownership of the property. So just be aware of that's part of your project. Wage requirements, and this is a really important one that we really want to we see many folks miss. All of our workers paid using PSEF funds must be paid at least 180% of the area minimum wage. And it's important in your proposal that you budget appropriately for that. And you budget appropriately over time, recognizing that this minimum wage will increase over time. This wage is updated every year on July 1st, and right now it is $27.81 per hour. So that anyone being accounted for in your proposal needs to make at least $27.81 per hour. And if your proposal is multiple years, you need to account for that increase over time. Now, rent stability. PSEF funded improvements cannot be used as a basis for rent increases. And as we move to reimbursements for items procured or work completed prior to the effective date of the grant agreement is not an allowable expense. Lastly, all projects must agree to comply with a workforce and contractor equity agreement adopted within the climate investment plan. Moving on to the scoring or review process. So once you put your application together, what is the process that we will move through and what are the criteria? First, on our process, as soon as the application period closes, we will begin eligibility review and review basic things like just the basic eligibility criteria. We will then move into technical feasibility, and this primarily takes place for projects with physical improvements, implementation grants where you have a physical improvement. Is the project technically feasible? Can you do what you can? Are there any physical impediments, permitting barriers, other things that make a project not feasible? And then we begin the applicant vetting process where we review the organization and make sure that they can, that they have the capacity to implement the project that they're describing. Once we've walked through those steps, projects that pass the eligibility review, the technical feasibility, the applicant vetting, move on to scoring panels, where then a scoring panel may consider and review and score the application. Once projects move through that process and receive a score, then we begin the process of portfolio development that we ultimately pull together and bring in recommendations to City Council. Now, the scoring criteria broadly are grouped into 4 categories, and we'll describe them here in the next few slides. It's focused on the organization and project team, about 30 points there. It's focused on the project plan and the benefits, 55 points. It's focused on the more specific workforce benefits, 5 points. And then it's focused on the budget, 10 points. Within the organization and the project team criteria, we look through really 3 core attributes that are awarded a total of 30 points. That the organization has a track record of delivering programs that benefit PSEF priority populations and that it is well positioned to continue doing so as part of the project. That the project team has the demonstrated partners and demonstrated experience that will support the project success. And that the application demonstrates strong understanding and practices around community organizing, outreach, or stakeholder engagement focused on our priority populations so that we're effectively delivering the benefits to those communities. Now, the next 3 sections, we'll talk about the project plan and benefits, and it's slightly different depending on whether you're applying for an implementation grant that has a physical improvement, so an energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation decarbonization, regenerative agriculture, or green infrastructure project, or whether it's a workforce contractor development project, or whether it's a planning grant. And so here, what we look to is that the project description is complete, intended outcomes are clear. We look at the greenhouse gas emissions reduction and the cost effectiveness of those. We look at whether there's an appropriate plan in place to maintain and support those emissions reductions. We look at other non-greenhouse gas emissions focused environmental benefits. We look at how the project reduces costs for our priority populations, how it provides that direct economic benefit. We look at how projects provide health benefits and evaluate how project improves resiliency, climate resiliency specifically. And then whether the degree to which the project will benefit priority populations and its alignment with our guiding principles, which we stated earlier. Now, for workforce and contractor development implementation projects, slightly different project plan and benefit scoring criteria. First is the same, project description is incomplete and the intended outcomes are clear. And then that the service activities and timeline described will result in the intended outcomes. And then we look at whether the project will support our goals of diversifying the workforce in the green economy, diversifying contractors, or improving the knowledge of youth and their readiness to engage in climate careers. We also look at whether the project provides other social benefit, and then whether to the extent to which the project benefits PSEF priority population, and lastly, its alignment with our guiding principles. And lastly, for our planning grants, the project plan and benefits section is really focused on fewer criteria, but still 55 total possible points. Well, the first is that the opportunity statement demonstrates understanding of issues and addresses climate justice. The second is that the scope of the planning process is clear, manageable, and likely to succeed. That the project is being developed as a result of planning will benefit our priority populations, and how it overall aligns with the PSEF guiding principles. The last two sections of our scoring criteria are focused on the workforce benefits, and this is around how the contractor hiring and recruitment practices for workers will support achieving the goals within our workforce and contractor equity agreements. And then the budget scoring criteria, 10 possible points, and it is focused on the degree to which the project budget is complete and reasonable, and the degree to which the project leverages additional or outside resources. All right. You've heard quite a bit from me. I want to thank you all and excited for the applications we expect to see this window. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Mika Barrett, to walk folks through how to apply for the grant through our newly developed web grants platform. Mika.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hello, everyone. My name is Mika Barrett, and I'm a project manager with PSEF. And today I'm here to talk to you about PSEF's new grant management system, Web Grants. Web Grants is the online program that we'll be using for the application process and later for grant management. Before covering how to register for a Web Grants account and how to complete an application using it, I wanted to briefly share with you some of the